And I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. He is Navi Radjou, and he is a truly multinational, versatile person, born in India with French-American citizenship, and he is a well-known innovator and leadership advisor. He is one of the 50 most influential persons shaping innovation in France. So we are really honored to have him today here, and I would request Navi to come on the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had some strong chai so that I can keep you awake, hopefully. Thrilled to be here to do this closing keynote on the topic of frugal innovation. And just kind of look at these two words in the slide, right? It's kind of intriguing to see these two words together in the same sentence. Because something like this, which is innovative, like an iPhone, this costs almost $1,000, which is very expensive for 70% of the world's population that earns less than $10 a day. So something which we deem as innovative is not always frugal for the majority of humanity. And similarly, when you think about frugality, think about $1, let's say, right? If I give you $1 and I say, go start a company, you'll be laughing at me. You'll be like, what era do you live in? And more importantly, what area do you live in? Not in Silicon Valley, you're going to start a company with $1. But yet I want to show you that it is possible to come up with alternatives to this, innovative technologies, that can be made affordable and accessible to billions of people around the world. So that's the first aspect of frugal. The second aspect of frugal is the fact that if I give you just $1, can you actually start a breakthrough company, a company that makes a breakthrough technology? The answer is also yes. And we'll try to prove that both in the next 15 minutes or so. So I want to start with the origins of this concept of frugal innovation, which has very humble origins because it kind of coincides with my own background. I actually grew up in a former French colony called Pondicherry, made famous by the book and the movie Life of Pi. For those of you who saw it, the first 20 minutes were shot next to my actually family house. And it's a very dry climate, and we had very little rainfall. So me and my brothers would wake up early at 5 o'clock in the morning to fill these buckets with water, and that's all we had in the day to wash ourselves, clean ourselves, and cook. And once, maybe twice a week, we had the luxury of taking what we call a one-bucket shower, which is a shower in a bucket of water. So after experiencing this kind of extreme scarcity, probably I got tired of that, and lured by the promise of abundance, I went to the West to discover what is abundance. And I spent 7 years studying in Paris before immigrating to the US about exactly 20 years ago. I've been in Silicon Valley for 15 years now. And I've been consulting large Western companies on innovation strategies for the past 20 years now. And clearly in the Western world, innovation is deemed cool and awesome. As you can see with this spacecraft, Navi, launched by NASA, that entered Mars orbit in September 2015. It is cool, but also very expensive. This actually maybe costs us taxpayers, of course, American taxpayers, about nearly $700 million. And this is kind of reflective of what happened since World War II, is that companies are trying to outspend each other in terms of innovation by spending more and more in R&D, research and development. To the point where it has been estimated that in 2015, the world's largest companies spent a whopping nearly $700 billion in R&D. But what's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with the picture is that until 10 years ago, nobody dared challenge the equation or the formula that more investment R&D automatically leads to more innovation. There was always this assumption, belief that the more you invest in R&D, the more as a company you become innovative. And yet about 10 years ago, actually 12 years ago, Booz and Company, which is called Booz Allen and Milton at the time, a consultancy, actually started debunking this myth that more R&D leads to more innovation. They actually show there's no correlation between how much a company spends in R&D and how innovative it is in terms of whether financial performance or the kind of breakthrough technologies and products it brings to marketplace. So you see there's this kind of cartoon of the CEO who is very sad because he spent $2 million in R&D and only got a bloody t-shirt. So t-shirt is fine, but sometimes companies end up introducing products to marketplace, but sadly many of them fail because they don't take time to study what are the real customer needs. So for example, in the consumer goods sector, 85% of new products fail within 12 months because they don't really match an exact customer need. The other problem the large companies face, and that actually baffled me for the past 20 years, is that the more you put money into R&D or innovation projects, the more you become risk averse. So they start investing in processes like Six Sigma to make sure that everything goes according to plan. So this is a company that, as you know, 3M, that invented the Post-it, used to be one of the most innovative companies up to the mid-2000s. And then there was a guy from the CEO from General Electric who came, and he implemented Six Sigma everywhere, including R&D processes. And then the innovation capability started going downhill until George Buckley became CEO, and as he says, they can put in place a Six Sigma process and schedule for 3 good ideas on Wednesday and on Friday. It's not how it usually happens. So when he came as the CEO, he rolled back a lot of these processes, except in manufacturing side. And they then, within 5 years, became the 3rd most innovative company right after Google and Apple. So this kind of process orientation also stifles the agility of these companies. And last thing, and Silicon Valley gets the award for this. We also spend a lot of money to create a lot of useless stuff. Like this 400 juicer, which is so-called Wi-Fi enabled, to justify the price tag. They raised $100 million to make this juicer until Bloomberg revealed that it's no more effective than what I use every morning, which is a manual. Of course, so this is why, after noticing all these aberrations in our innovation system in the Western world, we decided that maybe we should look for a different kind of innovation paradigm, a new innovation model that actually has 3 important attributes: something that is cost-effective, affordable, something that is agile, flexible, and thirdly, something which is collaborative as well. And we told ourselves, me and the co-authors, that having grown up in 4 countries, we need to maybe go back to our roots. We need to go back into these resource constraints, emerging markets, to figure out how entrepreneurs in Africa, India, South America, and China go about innovating with very limited resources. And when we study them after 10 years, we discover something amazing, is that they have a very unique mindset, completely diametrically opposed to what we see in Silicon Valley, where here, an engineer comes to work Monday morning asking himself or herself the question, what if I can create an app that connects my fridge to my smartphone? Because we all have a phone, we all have a fridge, and if I run out of milk, it would be nice to get a text message so I can fetch a gallon of milk on the way back home. This is what I call the small what-if question. Because someone in India asked himself a big what-if question, which is, what if I can create a fridge that operates without electricity? This is a big what-if question because still 300 million Indians today are disconnected from electric grid. And this question wasn't asked by someone who has a PhD or an MBA actually, but someone who didn't even finish his high school. This is Mansur Prajapati, he's a potter by training, who developed this fridge made entirely of clay that doesn't consume any electricity. It simply uses the principle of evaporation to absorb the heat and retain the humidity in the inner chambers, and you can keep fruits and vegetables fresh for 5 days and milk fresh for 3 days. For 70% of the Indians who live in villages where food supply is erratic and electricity is not available, this is actually a godsend. And so when you look at this example, what we discovered is that actually in places like India, resource constraints is not a limitation. Actually is a catalyst, is a spur for innovation. And you see this kind of creative resilience in many other emerging markets, like in Peru, a country that has 95% humidity rate and receives only 1 inch of rainfall every year. In Lima, the capital, an engineering college came up with this giant advertising billboard that absorbs the humidity in the air, condenses it, purifies it, and generates 90 liters of drinkable water every day. Literally, they're alchemists. They can transmute humidity into air. Something you don't see into something, It's almost like spiritual, right? Shiva Shakti, right? Invisible becomes visible. Okay? So that is, there's a spiritual dimension of reality that you will see throughout my talk. It's about making what is invisible visible. And you see also in China, for example, which is sitting on a ticking time bomb because China is going to get older before it gets richer. By 2050, 500 million people in China will be above 60 years. And many of them live in rural areas and suffer from chronic conditions like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, etc. And they can build enough hospitals or train doctors. So here comes this telemedicine application that actually uses these easy-to-use medical devices that can be operated by nurses or local community workers in Chinese villages. And it basically collects the vital signs. It goes into a cloud. Algorithms analyze it. If there is a problem, it will notify a doctor remotely who can consult and offer a treatment plan. Okay? So it's a simple way to, and this is an important message, is that when it comes to frugal innovation, what matters is not to scale up. In India, we talk about big health campuses with thousands of people. This is a new way of thinking of scaling out. It's about a decentralized, distributed way of delivering care, as opposed to, so the idea is that if the patient cannot come to the hospital has to figure out a way to go to the patient. Okay? And that's kind of one of the important messages of frugal innovation as well. So, of course, when I say all this, like, in the West, people are like, that's all nice, but we can send a man to the moon. Can you do that in India? Well, we did better than that. We sent a mission to Mars successfully, as you know, Mongolian, which entered, in September 2015, Mars orbit, except that this cost only $74 million. That's 1/10 of the budget of NASA, and it was developed 3 times. Now, you should understand that what India spends the whole year is what NASA spends a single day. Okay? Now, it gets even more interesting because Hollywood explores space in fiction with movies like Gravity, that's $100 million. Armageddon, $200 million. Avatar, almost $300 million. What they're doing it in fiction, India does that cheaper in reality. That's the moral of the story. Of course, there's a moon landing coming up soon as well this year, I believe in summer, so that's going to actually get even more interesting. So, of course, now I want to kind of, I started with some examples, then I will go into the kind of formal theory and everything, principles and whatnot. But the 3 big ideas we discovered as we studied all these entrepreneurs, these frugal innovators in emerging markets. First is this one, which is very counterintuitive. They use abundance to overcome scarcity. Wait a second, if they feel scarcity, how can they feel abundant? Well, I use this hourglass as a metaphor to explain what it is the fact that these entrepreneurs are aware of the fact that indeed they know the glass is half empty. Tangible resources like energy, water, capital are scarce. But when the external resources are scarce, they're able to go within themselves to tap abundant inner resources. India is all about developing interiority, as you know. So they go inside and they find this abundance of intangible resources like ingenuity, empathy, resilience, but also in a societal level, things like traditional knowledge, like Ayurveda, for example, right? Or biodiversity that exists, in places like Brazil or India, or the social capital. The example of the telemedicine in China, right? It's about using the community to take care of elderly people instead of asking them to come, live in a hospital. So they use what is abundant to overcome what is scarce. Now, if you look at this image, you can say, what about technologies? Why innovation has to be always about creating new technologies? Can we use existing technologies and recombine them to create new value? And one continent that is teaching us how to do that on a large scale is Africa. Because the continent of extremes. On the one hand, 80% Africans don't have a bank account, 80% Africans don't have electricity. But 80% Africans have a mobile phone. So they have abundance of mobile connectivity, existing infrastructure. So they're using this to overcome all the scarcity of basic services, such as banking services. This is M-Pesa in Kenya, which enables half the population today to send and receive money using the mobile phone without having a bank account. And half the country's GDP is transacted to the system. So people always say, when will Africa develop an iPhone? They don't need iPhone. They develop the iTunes or the platform. Because once you have electronic money as a platform, mobile platform, you can start building apps, not electronic apps, but real apps to buy physical services like electricity. So the same company that launched M-Pesa has launched M-Kopa, which allows Kenyans to buy solar energy on a pay-as-you-go basis by using the mobile phone to make a daily micropayment of 30 cents. So they take fixed costs and they variabilize. So when Obama went to Kenya, he made sure, to visit this M-Pesa solution. And there's a great article in Business Week, you should read, I should have added it. It's a reporter that goes to Kenya and he spends 10 days and the editor asks him to use no credit card, no cash, and buy everything from taxi to hotel, safari, food, everything, just using the mobile phone. And he comes back to New York and the last sentence in the article is, I feel like a caveman who has been handed a brick lighter. Coming from New Yorker. Okay? So that shows how Africa is leapfrogging from no banking straight to mobile banking, from solar light straight to, from candlelight straight to solar light. Okay? So now, the second big idea, after studying the examples we discovered, is the fact that these are alchemists. These innovators are able to transform and transmute adversity into an opportunity, which is very much like in martial arts, where you take the adversary's energy and you turn it to advantage. So this is the example of Kanak Das. There are many of them, but this is my favorite. Is a young man in Assam, in northeast India, who got tired of riding the bicycle in his village because the roads were filled with potholes, bumps, which slowed him down. So instead of complaining about it, he set up this device on his bicycle that actually converts bumps into acceleration energy. So the more bumps in the road, the faster the bike rides. Okay? So the problem doesn't slow him down. On the contrary, it gives him an advantage now. Okay? So that's the second idea we've discovered, right? The ability to transmute adversity into an opportunity. And it gets even better. You can do that in a corporate level as well. This is the case of Haier, a big Chinese, white goods manufacturer. They got a phone call from a farmer in China complaining that his washing machine gets clogged. When the technician goes to see what's happening, they discovered that he was using the washing machine to wash potatoes. Of course, if you're a typical company, you will say, wait a second, this is not my plan. I never planned to develop a machine that washes washing potatoes, putting that way. Maybe there's a whole market for it. So they did develop a washing machine that washes potatoes. He became the best seller. So you should understand about Haier. This is an incredible corporate success story in terms of organizational design. They have about nearly 90,000 employees, but they don't have a classic org chart. Functions like marketing, R&D, silos like that. Instead, they have about 4,500 cross-functional teams made up of R&D, manufacturing, sales, marketing, and customer service. So when the technician reported the problem, one of the cross-functional team owned the problem. He said, I take it, within 8 weeks, they cranked out the product. I mean, for those of you who work with large companies, 2 months is a record time. Okay? But they can do it. So that's also the idea, is that they have this kind of agility. Remember we talked about agility? Because when I say agility and frugality go hand in hand, you'll see why, because you're saving time. When you increase time to market, it becomes frugal as well. Right? So we wrote the first book on these three principles of agility, frugality, and simplicity, called the Jugaad innovation. Jugaad is a Hindi word. I don't have to tell you what it means, but essentially, for those of you who know it, it essentially means the ability to come up with a makeshift solution with very limited resources and be able to survive in very difficult situations. And this is a Hindi term, but there is a character in the Western world, a TV character that really embodies this kind of creative, resilient spirit of Jugaad, and that's MacGyver. So for those of you who have seen him, how many of you actually MacGyver? Okay, so I'm getting old. So, so he is basically a famous TV action hero in the 80s and 90s, who, unlike James Bond, doesn't have a fancy suit. He only wears jeans. He doesn't have fancy gadgets. He basically uses, his Swiss Army knife and anything he can find wherever he goes to survive and pull himself out of difficult situations. So that kind of create resilience is what we try to celebrate, with the Jugaad. And then that evolved today to be known in a more formal way as frugal innovation. Because the problem in the West is that unless you have a formula, you're not taken seriously, an equation or something. So we decided to go from the mindset, which is very vague, to create actually a formula around this. And today it's called, frugal innovation. So let me kind of elaborate, starting at the kind of 50,000 feet level and go deeper and deeper into this concept. So frugal innovation in a nutshell, the cliche way of saying is it's about doing more with less. That is, essentially, create more value using fewer resources. So far, it sounds very straightforward. While at the same time, minimizing resources that are financial resources, natural resources like water, as you know, it's going to be a problem not only in the southern hemisphere, but here in California as well. Natural resources and time. Again, I say, right, many problems today have to be dealt quickly, so we have to save our time as well. So this sounds relatively simple, and that's why we call it not do more with less, but do better with less. It has a moral, dimension. But where it gets interesting is when you start introducing an order of magnitude. What if your competition comes up with a solution that delivers 10 times more value at 10 times less cost? You start getting quite, interesting. And then let's push the envelope. What if someone comes up with a solution that delivers 100 times more value using 100 times fewer resources? Then it gets a bit disruptive, isn't it? Let me give you an example of that. Today there are millions of babies that are born prematurely, and we keep them today in an incubator in the Western world, which costs about $20,000 and requires electricity. Now, not only it's expensive, but there is something which is intangible, is the fact that the mother cannot have physical contact with the baby, which is in a plexiglass kind of structure. So looking at this problem, Jane Chan and 4 other Stanford graduates had this brilliant idea to come up with something very ingenious, which is called Embrace, which is a solution designed like a small sleeping bag. So I brought it here with me. So it looks like this, as you can see. This is the size. And inside you have this phase change material. It's like wax that you can place on a heating pad. It melts. You reinsert that inside. And you can keep the baby at constant temperature for 6 hours straight. After that, you reheat it. Okay? And this solution costs only $200. 1% of the cost of the incubator. It doesn't require electricity. And it can be made with local tailors, so there's a sustainability angle as well. And most importantly, this is the denominator, right? Less. What's better? What's better is that enables skin-to-skin contact between the mother and the baby. And this is important because an incubator can save the physical life of the baby, but this guarantees the emotional well-being of the kid when he becomes an adult. So it's about long-term thinking. Okay? So this simple solution has already saved the lives of more than 250,000 babies. And the first mother who benefited from it is someone who lost 2 other kids before, premature kids, and she was able to save her 3rd kid thanks to the solution. Okay? And the goal is to save So this is why I kind of always get very emotional and touched about these examples, because it goes beyond the economic sphere, as you can see, right? Of course, they find microfinancing to make sure that even the poor people, because $200 is a lot of money, but with microfinancing, you can make that affordable as well for these people, right? So there's a business model, I call it, these are innovators who have a business mind, social heart, okay? To be able to connect them. And now we can push it one step further. What if you can come up with a solution? Remember I told you about this. If I give you $1, what can you innovate with this? So let's apply this here. What if there's a way to innovate with much fewer resources? So that not only you come up with a product which is 100 times cheaper, but R&D tools that cost 100 times less. So suddenly I can turn everyone a huge innovator, right? And this is the promise of Manu Prakash. He's a professor at Stanford University who is pioneering something called the frugal science. So we are taking frugality from technology to the next level, which is scientific growth. And what he's creating are these low-cost medical discovery and medical diagnostic tools, like microscope. The entry-level product, the microscope, cost about $2,000, $3,000. He has created a microscope which looks like a foldable origami for only $1. And they're shipping about 1 million around the world. Initially designed as a low-cost medical diagnostic tool to diagnose, so you can basically amplify by 2,000 times subcellular structures like viruses, so you can detect infectious diseases like HIV, TB, malaria in poor countries. The next thing they know is that it's also becoming an interesting way to teach poor kids, like the Marai kids here, the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, in a very frugal way. But it goes beyond that, because they're not just studying chemistry, but potentially they could become the next Pasteur, the next kind of geniuses in science who can develop the next drugs as well, right? So it becomes a fantastic way, essentially, to get kids excited about science and technology with what we call learn by doing. And this is a new paradigm, as you know, emerging in education, is that, and I know that we talked about the Guru Sishya, Parambara and all the tradition, but I think that's going to be challenged because it's still the same model, but the Guru is no longer an older person. The Guru can be the kid next to you. So we are moving to new paradigm education where it's Sishya to Sishya level education, learning, and secondly, it's going to be learn by doing, as opposed to learning theory and then go offline. Right? So this is also going to help accelerate this development of the new education paradigm. So that's why for me, frugal innovation is beyond the economic realm, financial realm, business realm. First and foremost, it's all about how can we maximize joy in the world while reducing suffering. So this is kind of what the essence of frugal innovation is. Now I have to go into the business world. Unfortunately, we're all living in America, so it's very much about business. So let me kind of make the transition now and get into more practical stuff, which is actually how can companies adopt frugal innovation. So it's a nice concept, but what do we do Monday morning, right? So to speak, how do we apply this in our existing organizations? For that, we actually have to start understanding something, especially in the Western world, which is there's a radical shift happening in the value system of consumers and employees. In particularly, consumers are becoming what we call value and values conscious. As you can see here, more and more research shows that, for example, 90% of consumers expect companies to address social and environmental issues, which used to be dealt by governments, but especially with the current president of this country, clearly it's not going to happen. So clearly that means that the onus is on companies now to deal with big issues like climate change or escalating healthcare costs, etc., are going to be asked to be dealt by companies now, and consumers want companies to do that. Secondly, you see that more and more consumers are becoming locavores, and they're trying to consume things that are grown, like food, locally or produced locally. And I think this phenomenon is going to accelerate with things like 3D printing and other technologies. We'll be able to produce things more and more locally, or regionally at least. And generations Y and Z particularly are valuing quality of life over quantity in life, as evidenced by the fact that half of them prefer to share cars as opposed to owning a car. That's why we see the growth of the so-called sharing economy with car sharing and apartment sharing. But more importantly, this may not be news for you, but it's bad news for large companies because many young people want to be their own boss, becoming entrepreneurs as opposed to working for a large organization. So this shift in value, in my opinion, is actually denoting something much more deeper that is happening in society. Is that I think that actually the citizens are becoming more conscious. Now, of course, for Westerners, conscious means essentially I'm awake or I'm asleep. But in the Eastern tradition, especially in India, we have a rich understanding of what consciousness is, which is actually described through the chakra system. And we have, as you know, 7 chakras in our subtle body. And the first 3 actually govern our animal instincts and needs. And these are essentially fear, desire, and power. As long as we are, our perspective, our worldview, our actions, our motivation are driven by these three energies, they are going to live a mode of existence, lifestyle, which I call the having lifestyle, which is essentially our identity, our character structure. Everything is determined by what I have. What car I have, what title I have in the company, how much I have in bank account. It is never enough, right? Because you always look for more. Because once fear is satisfied, you desire more. And once you have more, it's not enough, you want it all. This is power and control, right? You're just kind of, this is the wheel of karma, by the way. It keeps going around like this. Nothing happens. Life keeps very circular. No progress, no evolution. Life actually becomes evolutionary only when you connect with the heart chakra, when you unlock compassion, which is a passion to reduce the suffering of others. But of course, in the West, everybody talks about the emotional quotient and emotional intelligence as the next big thing. But for us, this is just a stepping stone to access higher capabilities, like ingenuity, which is the authentic voice, the unique song that each of us is destined to sing. Unfortunately, many of us will die without ever discovering it, let alone express it. So self-expression happens here. And then beyond that, you have access to intuition, which is the ajna, the third eye. And then there's a sense of unity that you're one and interconnected with everyone and everything, which is the seven chakras or stars. So when you start activating the upper chakras, and I think that's what's happening with Gen Y and Z, is that unlike my generation, X, or the previous one, baby boomers, I think they are kind of trying to get out of this kind of, rut here. And they're having these chakras almost activated earlier in the life than was the case for previous generations. And because of that, we have to figure out as companies, how do we satisfy the needs, but also the aspirations and the values of this next generation conscious consumers and employees. And for that, we wrote this book as a kind of a way to help companies understand how they have to change the innovation paradigms to serve this next generation consumers. And there's a book out there, you can shameless plugging for my book, but if you want to buy a copy of it, there's one outside. But what I want to do actually is to go a bit deeper into what is the essence of the book. The essence of the book is, there are two slides that have summarized everything in the book. The first one is this. More and more customers, I think, around the world are going to ask you for solutions that have 5 important attributes. 4 are tangible, and the 5th is intangible, but that's not important. So the 4 are about value, and the 5th is values. So the 4 are affordability, simplicity. People are looking to simplify their lives. They care about sustainability. At the same time, they don't want to compromise quality. So these are going to be the 4 tangible values that all companies have to provide in their solutions. But then there's the 5th one that's going to differentiate. If you and your competition offers this, it's not enough. Because the 5th is going to be purpose. Something that gives meaning, right? So meaning and purpose is going to become more and more important. It will be the heart. And everything is expressed through that, right? So I use it as a spider graph, right? To show that essentially, if you have a purpose-driven company, coming up with these attributes will become easier. But it's much harder to start with these 4 attributes and then wake up Monday morning and say, now I want to become a purposeful company. That's much harder. So the second important takeaway is that right now this concept is taking off slowly. That's why I'm excited to be here. It's of course a concept born in India, but it's like expanding like bushfire. Same way like open innovation in 2003 was born as a concept, and then over the next 5 years, took off around the world. So this concept is taking off around the world, which is exciting. But sadly, the people who practice this concept are kind of focusing on frugal innovation primarily at the level of products and services and maybe processes, which is how can I come up with a frugal product or a frugal service or a frugal process, which is fantastic. For a company that never did it, if they can apply frugality in R&D and come up with frugal product and services, awesome. But what I tell them is that this is just level 1 of adoption. And it gives you a fantastic factor advantage, but you need to go beyond that. So let me start with some examples of what I mean by frugal product and services. One of them is a company in my book that studies Intuit. Is anyone here from Intuit? Oh, okay, so you know very well. So you can ask the gentleman more about their famous follow me home initiative where they spend about 10,000 hours a year. The R&D and marketing team actually goes into the homes and offices of the customers to actually study how the customers use the software. Why is it frugal? Because when you actually see what they're using and what they're not using, you don't have to add the kind of features they're going to use. Right? Basically, you don't over-engineer. Right? You actually focus exactly on what the customer needs. Okay? So that's why frugality always starts with the customer. And oftentimes, as I said again, a lot of the problem why over-engineering happens is that the R&D is very disconnected from the real world, the real customer needs. So going into the field and using ethnographic kind of studies, but really understand what the customer explicit needs are, but also latent pain points are as well, gives you incredible insights in terms of coming up with a simple but effective solution. The other domain of frugality is to say, well, this is an interesting example in customer service. So this is a company called GiftGap, which is a mobile operator in the United Kingdom. They actually don't have a customer service. What they do is they use the customers as customer support. They farm out all the customer technical problems to customers. And every time customers resolve, they have expert customers who resolve the technical problems of other customers. And whenever they do that, they get bonus points, which are used to reduce their phone bill. So it's a nice way to think about, frugalizing the customer service as well. Now, you might say, is it just a cost-cutting measure? That's the thinking. Remember the denominator. Look at what happened denominator. They are the highest valued brand because of customer service. And this is new, right? Because the Gen Y and Gen Z don't trust brands. They trust peers. And this is why you have to become more like a community manager and a facilitator of customer networks, more than thinking about managing the assets and being, thinking about functional excellence. So that paradigm has to change as well, right? Now, this is about frugal product and services, which is the first level. As I said, this gives you just a practical advantage because a rival can come up with something which is, cheaper rather than you as a product. So the next levels to go is about coming up with a frugal business model, which is make sure that everything you do in the company is frugal, and more importantly, cultivate a frugal mindset, which is much harder. But if you do that, then you become unbeatable. And I also use the iceberg metaphor because competition can reverse engineer your frugal products. But it's harder to reverse engineer a business model, even more a mental model, because it's in the DNA of the company. That also means if the CEO leaves, somewhere from the founders, once you inculcate frugality in the DNA, even if you leave or you're asked to leave, that will be sustained. At this level is dangerous. So you can create a frugal innovation initiative, and then when you leave, that's it. The next year we'll go back to the old ways of doing things. Companies that are that have spent many years inculcating frugality into the business models and then into mental models. The one company I think I have to single out is Renault Nissan. As you know, it's a joint venture between Renault and Nissan. The CEO, Carlos Ghosn, is actually the person who coined the term frugal engineering in 2006. When he went to India and was very impressed by the Indian engineers' ability to innovate faster, better, cheaper than the French engineers. And that's the concept that has evolved to be known today as frugal innovation. So why Renault has been a pioneer of frugal engineering? Well, in 2004, they first launched a car called Logan for only 5,000 euros. Okay? And initially it was destined for emerging markets, and to their surprise, it became a bestseller in Western Europe. And today, they have a whole product line called Dacia, which is built on the same kind of concept, and that accounts for over 40% of the revenues today. It has become the cash cow. And they have sold over 5 million units since 2004. Okay? Of course, they didn't stop there. Then they asked the person, Gerard Detroube, who invented, the engineer who developed the Logan car, to now go to Chennai, India. Why? First of all, to study how chaotic the traffic jams are and how bad the roads are. Again, remember, like Intuit, to see go in the field, to develop empathy for the users. Why Chennai? Because out of Chennai, they actually set up R&D lab. one of the biggest labs set up by a car company in India. And in that lab, unlike other car companies, they didn't just create a new car. They created a whole new car platform. It has never been done before by any MNC in India, or actually in China. And a car platform, as you know, is basically the foundation of all cars. So once you have a car platform, and this is called the CMF-A, and the A stands for affordability, ultra affordable. This becomes the foundation to start building many, many cars. And the first one that came out is the Quid in 15, for the price of about $4,000. Okay? Now, they're not stopping there because already they have achieved, this is a great success story because they have about 10 million cars sold from these platforms, the CMF. But remember in the spider graphic, I said, affordability, simplicity. But what about sustainability? It's still using petrol, fuel. Right? Well, that's a beauty. Once you start with that foundation, you can do this. Girard is in China right now, using the same platform to create $8,000 EV. You can imagine how disruptive that's going to be. Okay? So they're again reusing, right, the same platform for multiple models that actually integrate all these attributes I talked about earlier. Okay? So this is about the business model. Then I talked about going one step further and think about, how do we inculcate this frugality in the mindset, which I call, frugal mindfulness. Here I want to share some examples of companies who are doing something quite disruptive and potentially, I would say, creating new paradigms in areas like customer service. So this is the example of the Leroy Merlin. They are the #1 rival of the Home Depot, home improvement retailer in Europe. And they are converting the last mile. You always think last mile from a supply chain perspective, right? So I am here and I make products, manufacture, distribute. That's the last mile. The customer, you are here. They are turning it on its head. They're saying the last mile becomes the first mile. That's where R&D starts. So that's why they're converting the stores in France and Europe to become maker spaces, or what we call, how many of you know about maker spaces? So maker spaces are like workshop areas. It could be as big, no bigger than this. That's how it started. It's called also Fab Labs. But in this case, it's 2,000 square meters, equipped with 3D printers. The kind of industrial tools that you only find in a high-end factory are now made available for everyday citizens. So the idea is the following. Next time your washing machine breaks down, you don't throw it away. You take the defective part, go there, and you 3D print a replacement part. Okay? Similarly, you don't go to IKEA to buy a chair, you go there to build your own chair. So the old kind of old capitalism motto was, I consume, therefore I am. Now the new motto is, I create, therefore I am. You have to figure out a way to get the customer to co-create with you. And if you go there to Paris, you can go visit this interesting shop next to Paris. And it's also becoming an accelerator, an incubator for hardware startups. A lot of citizens come and they develop something for themselves, and then they're like, wait a second, this is so good, I can start a company out of it. It's becoming the kind of the next wave of hardware startups as well from these locations. So this is also a way of thinking about value creation differently than the traditional paradigm, which is pushing products to customer. There's a way to start pulling products to them. Another area of frugality, which is very nascent, which is in the B2B sharing. This is something that is very exciting. If you think about the sharing economy, many of you know about Airbnb, to rent an apartment online. You know about car sharing. This is consumers, us sharing stuff. This is the B2C sharing economy, which is estimated to become about $350 billion by 2025, according to PwC. I think that there is another big part of the B2B sharing economy, which is the B2B sharing. What happened? Because you see, any trends, we have all been in the tech sector for a while, in my case 25 years, any trend that starts in the B2C, I would say, close attention, because it gets into enterprise. In this case, it's not enterprise, it's intra-enterprise. It's going to be inter-enterprise, B2B literally. Okay? So what I mean by that is, what happens if businesses start sharing assets, resources, employees, clients, intellectual property. Sounds very radical. That's already happening. For example, this is a solution in India launched by Rotash Mal. Rotash was the former CEO of Escort, the tractor company, and he's now at 60, starting a company called EM3 Agri Services. This is the Uber for farmers. So a farmer presses a button on his phone, and a guy shows up in a tractor, says, "I'm here to help you harvest." Okay? They're starting to share equipment. Again, fixed costs have to become very low. It's not just equipment, assets. It could be services, like, how can I use, like, have you heard this amazing initiative? I mean, anyone here from Andhra Pradesh? Kudos to you. How many of you heard about what happened last week, the big announcement from Andhra Pradesh? So Andhra Pradesh has now become the first state in India to become zero budget farming. That means they will use no fertilizers, no chemicals in farming, and yet keep up with demand. So check it out, called zero budget farming. So the point I'm making is that the challenge, there's a lot of farmers committing suicide in India, and they have to keep up with latest trends. So this is the idea is like, it's not just about offering the equipment, but they can also offer this consult advisory services for the farmers to transition from a chemically based farming to organic farming, right, and scale it up. And then it gets even more interesting. In Europe, they are way ahead, by the way, compared to here. This is in Netherlands. This is called the Flow2. It's a B2B sharing marketplace, which enables hospitals to share their idle assets. If I have an MRI machine, which is underused, I can open it up to patients from other hospitals. Why not? I have to optimize the use of assets. Right? It's a win-win. Right? So we see a lot of interesting frugal approaches here to reusing and sharing assets and resources among companies. Then comes the last one, which is important to becoming frugal here, is how we deal with natural resources. And especially being in California, I don't have to tell you that water is going to become a huge problem for us. And this is an interesting, scary graphic actually. If you take all the water on Earth and you model it as a sphere, this is what it looks like. And all the drinkable water is a tiny droplet. This is what we have for 7.5 billion people today. And when we have 10 million people by 2050, well, forget about 2050, look at this. Within 12 years, we are going to overshoot. That means we are going to be consuming more than we have in terms of supply of water. Right? So we have to learn to do more with less, starting with water. And so I'm going to wrap up with these last examples to illustrate this other big paradigm which is emerging. It's called the circular economy. And this is the idea of, how many of you know about the circular economy? Okay, so this is very well developed in Europe, and India is picking up now, and China has a national policy around this, and India is going to also go big time with this. This is about recycling, reusing on steroids in a nutshell. Okay, the idea is to say that in the old times, you take raw materials from Earth, you make an iPhone, use it for 2 years, and then get rid of it. And then we upgrade. And this goes into landfill. Right? Plastic, single-use plastic, right? Which is polluting, it's a 6th continent now, as you know. If you take all the plastic on oceans, it's equivalent of a 6th continent. Right? It's how much plastic we have. So this new model says, no. You have to design products now in such a way that there is no end of life. There's end of use. Once you finish using it, I pick it up and I recover the materials inside to make new products. This is called cradle-to-cradle design, as opposed to cradle-to-grave. This is cradle-to-cradle. Reuse again in closed fashion. And this is being applied by many companies now. The company that makes these carpet, there are only 2 in the world. It's called Interface, American company, and Tarkett, European company. They both are committed to this. By 2025, both want to become a zero-waste company. No way, none of the carpet will go to landfill. You'll be able to recycle again and again. Okay? Now, it gets very interesting because next time many of South Indians, we like filter coffee, all of us like filter coffee, and don't throw it away. Because with coffee waste, you can come up with 24 applications like cosmetics, fertilizers, etc. There's a whole cottage industry developing with startups to recycle coffee waste. Or in the case of Levi Strauss, they have a collection that uses recycled plastic bottles to make eight plastic bottles to come up with 1 pair of jeans. Okay. So this is in the product side, which is very exciting. But there are companies now who are applying it to the whole organization, big companies. This is Unilever, which has this bold plan to double the revenues by 2020, reducing the carbon footprint by 50%, go from $40 billion to $80 billion, at the same time reducing the eco impact. And you can imagine how large a task is, and yet they pull it off very well. They become a zero waste company last year. That means that no waste is generated by the factory that goes to landfill. And they have about hundreds of factories, you can imagine, right? So they managed to do that with the circular economic principles. They also have now energy positive buildings. So it's not, that's why remember in the frugal innovation I put values, I said ecological value. Generally we put that in the denominator. We say reduce carbon footprint. It's not enough. The next level, game-changing level would be I have to enlarge my ecological handprint. Can I do more good for the planet than less harm? Right? So this is the example of Unilever, new headquarters in Paris, which actually uses solar energy to offset power consumption of 150 houses around. So every building and every factory has to become energy positive. That's kind of where these companies are going. And they even do one step further, which is they even share the intellectual property with other companies. For example, they came up with this idea to use less aluminum in the deodorant, 45% less aluminum, which reduces CO2 emissions by 50%. And after having 2 years of exclusivity of the technology, they shared it with even rivals. Why? Because they want the whole industry to move up in terms of performance of sustainability. Okay. So that's a kind of enlightened, mindset we need. If you want to get the whole industry to accelerate, its performance in terms of sustainability. And this, I swear, is the last slide because we're all tech people, so I thought we at least one tech in the blue. Because I want to connect the circularity, which is an obsession lately for me. Because coming from India, see, in India we don't have the notion of time. Time is linear. This is my new obsession. Because in the Western world, we always see time linear, right? There's a big bang, there's Genesis, there's a big crunch, there's apocalypse. Very linear. In the East, it's circular. So if you apply circularity to even knowledge, then we have a circular knowledge economy. That means, instead of reinventing the wheel, how can we reuse existing knowledge and technology? Right? And if you apply that, for example, to the tech field, it gets interesting. For example, these are going to be the building blocks of next generation medical devices. It sounds ridiculous, right? Wait a second, what? You can create a medical device with $35? Well, this is Raspberry Pi. Many of you know about this probably. How many of you know about Raspberry Pi? So many of you know that, right? This is actually a computer-style credit card developed at Cambridge University, and 15 million units have been sold around the world. And with this now, you can revolutionize healthcare. For example, at Cambridge, there's a startup called the HeartFab Technologies, and they deal with the congestive heart failures problem. So when you have a heart failure, when you go home after surgery or something, there's a remission. There's a risk that relapse. The risk that you have another heart attack. So how do you control that? You can't keep getting the patient to come see the doctor, right, for test. So this actually uses, I think, 4 or 5 Raspberry Pis, and this is set up at the bedside. So when the patient wakes up in the morning, it actually monitors the ankles to see if there's an inflammation. It's called peripheral edema. If there is an inflammation after 2 days, it goes to the cloud to analyze data. If it's really serious, it contacts